After completing this chapter, you will be able to define the common terms used in longitudinal stability, recognize that a ship trims and heels about the center of flotation, identify that the true mean draft is at the center of flotation and that the layer correction needs to be applied to the draft taken at midships. Define the term freshwater allowance and state how it is calculated. Recognize what is included in a typical table of hydrostatic particulars for a ship. The trim is the difference between the forward and after drafts of a vessel. An after trim is where the after draft is larger than the forward draft, and a forward trim is where the forward draft is larger than the after draft. A vessel floating with the same drafts at each end is referred to as being on an even keel. The trim may be changed by the following methods: moving a weight already on board in a forward or aft direction, by adding or discharging weights at different positions longitudinally, possibly by change of density of the water in which the vessel floats. The change of trim is the difference between the original trim and the final trim. The trimming moment of a force is the measure of the trimming effect of this force about a specific point, and will be dependent on the size of the force and the length of the lever from that point. The trimming moment of a weight loaded or discharged is the size of the weight and its position as a distance from the center of flotation or after perpendicular. Either is acceptable. When considering a weight moved longitudinally, it is equal to the magnitude of the weight times the distance actually moved fore or aft. Remember, when a weight is loaded or discharged, there will also be an overall sinkage or rise due to the increase or decrease of displacement, and this value is dependent on the TPC for that draft. The center of flotation is the geometrical center of the vessel's waterplane area and the point about which the vessel trims and heels, sometimes called the tipping center. It is often not appreciated that heeling is also about this point. With a rectangular waterplane, this would be amidships, but with a conventional ship shape, the CF may be forward or aft of this position. The longitudinal metacenter is the point of intersection of the vertical upward forces through the center of buoyancy in the even keel and the slightly trimmed condition. The longitudinal metacentric height, GML, is the metacentric height in the longitudinal sense, and is the distance from the longitudinal center of gravity and the longitudinal metacenter. It is much larger than the transverse GM value, and can be even larger than the ship's length. The MCTC is the moment, in ton-meters, required to change the trim of a vessel by 1 centimeter. When a weight is moved longitudinally on board a ship lying on an even keel, the ship will change its trim about the center of flotation, CF, and not about amidships. As there has been no change of displacement, the draft at the center of flotation will not change, but there will be a change of trim and a change of drafts at the ends of the vessel. As it is trimmed about the center of flotation and not amidships, this change of drafts at the ends of the vessel will not be the same value upwards as downwards, and there will also be a change of draft amidships. As the displacement has not changed, the draft amidships can no longer be the correct draft to establish the actual displacement. This can only be the one which has remained the same, which is the one as measured at the center of flotation. Therefore, the true mean draft is the one measured at the CF. The correction applied to the amidships draft to correct its value to the true mean draft is sometimes referred to as the layer correction, or correction for layer. The easiest method to calculate the new drafts fore and aft after loading a weight is to assume it is loaded at the CF, and then shift it to the correct position. This method is only suitable for single weights. For multiple weights, a table of moments will normally be used. The change of trim will also need to be calculated, and then proportioned to determine the change in the drafts fore and aft, as shown in the example calculation. The fore and aft perpendiculars are vertical lines drawn at point near the forward and aft points of a ship and used for measurement purposes. The forward perpendicular is drawn at the most forward point on the hull, at the draft of the summer load line. The aft perpendicular is the vertical drawn through the rudder stock. In calculations, the length between the perpendiculars is often used, and is referred to by the letters L, B, P. Mid-length, amidships, is the midpoint between these perpendiculars. This is found by halving the distance LBP. Normally, a ship sails in salt water, and therefore saltwater drafts are the important drafts to be used. But if there is a change in the density to an alternative density, such as fresh water, it must be taken into account. The freshwater allowance is the number of millimeters by which the true mean draft changes when the vessel passes from salt water to fresh water or vice versa. Where there are densities different to salt water or fresh water, the freshwater allowance must be adapted to a dock allowance, which is a proportion of the freshwater allowance. There is a legal set of maximum drafts or freeboards allowed, to which the vessel may be loaded in different geographical areas and at different seasons throughout the year. This allows the ship to have a level of residual stability for safety purposes, and these must never be exceeded. The details and importance of these items are defined in the International Load Line Rules. The particulars about a vessel are set out in a table for the vessel floating on an even keel in salt water. This is known as the hydrostatic particulars for that ship. The one illustrated is obviously only for a small vessel. We have now reached the end of this chapter about longitudinal stability. We have learned that a ship trims and heels about the centre of flotation. The true mean draft is at the centre of flotation, and a layer correction needs to be applied to the draft taken amidships. The length between perpendiculars is usually measured between the most forward part of the hull at the draft at the summer load line and the rudder stock. The freshwater allowance is the number of millimeters by which the true mean draft changes when the ship passes from salt water to fresh water, or vice versa. It is calculated by dividing the displacement by 4 times the TPC. The hydrostatic particulars about a ship are set out in a table for the ship floating on an even keel in salt water.